Louisiana, but I haven't found it.
Yeah. Well, that whole thing up at Shreveport was mostly a black rally?
Yeah, it was black rally for Edwards. And I think Romer thought he was going to get Alphonse
To
Jefferson.
explain with this election, I mean, what's going on in this election? Who are these people? What's happening? Sort of a basic baseline explanation. It's a hard race. I just talked to Ken Bodie from NBC, and he was going, "We're not going to cover this because it's too hard to explain. We'll wait till it gets down to two people."
That's probably true, yeah. I haven't seen much in the national press about it at all.
I'm surprised. I think a lot of them suppose that Edwards is going to make it into the runoff, and it'll be a lot easier to do a story
Yeah.
out with him then.
Right, I think that's probably it.
He'll get live. How do you explain what's going on in this race? What's going on in it?
Who are the candidates? Who are the people?
We need a very simple statement about Governor Edwards is running for re-election and he's opposed
Okay.
by Wardlaw.
Well, we have a situation here where Governor Edwin Edwards is running for a fourth term, which would be the first man to ever serve 4 terms. He's had 2 very successful terms in the 70s, and he's had a pretty rocky third term. He had to take 4 years out because the Constitution doesn't allow you to succeed yourself after 2 terms. He's run into a lot of fiscal problems in this 4-year term because the price of oil dropped, the Louisiana economy fell apart, and unemployment has been very high. So he's gone into this election with a big negative rating, and consequently he's drawn quite a lot of opposition. 1 Republican and 3 Democrats are his strongest opponents. The 3 Democrats are all, to one degree or another, his proteges. Buddy Romer, his father, was Edwards' Commissioner of Administration during his first 2 terms. Jim Brown, now Secretary of State, was an Edwards floor leader in the state Senate, and Billy Tozan, Congressman Billy Tozan, was an Edwards floor leader in the House. Now they're all running against Edwards, and they all more or less repudiating everything that he stands for.
What about the Republican?
The Republican is a congressman named Bob Livingston who got elected in what was not considered a very Republican district. He was up against a Democrat that fell out, couldn't consolidate the normal Democratic support, and went in, and once he got in, he established himself and never lost an election since, even though the legislature has changed his district so much. I don't think he represents more than a few thousand people that he did originally. So the Republican's been very successful politically in the New Orleans area, and that's his base in this election. Now, whether he can consolidate the normal Republican support statewide and get into this runoff with Edwards is something we won't know till after the election day.
You know, you've got 5 candidates here, lots of issue papers, all sorts of stuff like that. But it seems like this whole election is about one thing.
Yeah, there's one issue, Edwin Edwards. All the candidates have talked about in the last few weeks is which of them is best suited to beat Edwin Edwards in the runoff. You might want to explain to a national audience that we have a unique open primary system here where the Republicans and Democrats all run in the same election. And the top 2 finishers in the first primary run it off in the second primary, whether they're Republicans, Democrats, Independent, or whatnot.
Why is the issue so narrow? Start off by saying, that the issue is Andrew Edwards. Why is that so?
Well, because Edwards is such a strong personality, he tends to dominate any election he's in. He's in the same sense that Huey Long and Earl Long dominated Louisiana politics in their eras. Edwards has dominated this era, and now that he seems to be in some trouble, the only thing they have to run against is Edwin Edwards and his record.
You think that's a very effective thing, or?
Well,
Stop for a second.
Sure.
After this goes by.
Give me a second.
One.
Suddenly with a lot of fans.
Well,
yeah.
Let's take a tack related to this. Louisiana politics has a reputation. How would you describe Louisiana politics?
I think Louisiana politics, I think A.J. Liebling probably described it best in his book, The Earl of Louisiana, when he said that it was much like the politics of Lebanon, with all the different factions competing with each other. Historically, of course, you had the populist Long faction against the more business-oriented anti-Long faction, and all that's changed, but it's really still the same because the people who used to be the anti-Longs are now call themselves Republicans, and the people who are oriented to the Longs call themselves Democrats. So you have a 2-party system, which really isn't a 2-party system because it's still fought with factions within the Democratic Party. I think you even find factions within the Republican Party now that it's grown up a little bit.
Is politics here really that much more colorful than it is other places?
Oh, I think it is. We have some real colorful people in the tradition of Earl Long and Huey Long, and now we have a Speedy Long running in this election. We just seem to come up with more characters than any place I've ever observed.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's because you have such a diverse population in Louisiana. You have the rednecks in the north, the Cajuns in the south, and all sorts of immigrants in the New Orleans area. And of course now, since the blacks in the last 2 decades have taken a big role, it's just a big mix that you don't find everywhere else.
Can you explain again for a national audience what Huey Long and populism mean in Louisiana?
Huey Long was really a unique figure. Populist is just a convenient term to describe him. But Louisiana was really late in coming into the 20th century with its politics. Things stayed the same as they were in the post-Reconstruction era until really 25 years into this century. So you had a great pent-up opposition of people who really had no opportunities in life, and Huey Long was the first guy to come along and capitalize on that and unify those people into a political force. So because it had been delayed, the force of the populist revolution was stronger here. And Huey, being the unique personality that he was, tried to translate it onto the national stage. He became a real figure in national politics. And in the process, he really set the mold for Louisiana politics that's still with us.
So Long is still relevant today?
Very definitely.
How can you incorporate that into a sentence in terms of?
We're still fighting the battle of Huey Long versus the anti-Long opposition. Edwin Edwards has managed to appropriate that mantle onto himself, and it leaves the other Democrats with a it's hard for them to find a footing because they don't want to be classified as Republicans and conservatives, and yet they've got to separate themselves from the Edwin Edwards aura.
What about Earl? Where did he fit in all this?
Earl was a pretty unique character in his own right. Of course, he got his political start under Huey, and they appealed to the same faction. But you can't lump them all in the same pot. Earl really, in some ways, was a better politician and closer to people. He didn't have the national ambition Huey had, and he was really much more interested in what was going on in Louisiana.
How about McKithen? Is he part of that tradition?
McKithen came out of the same tradition, although McKithen, if you look at his record, and particularly his first term, was a real reform governor. He came in and set some things straight that neither the Long faction nor the anti-Long faction had been able to accomplish. His biggest mistake was running for a second term, and a lot of commitments he had to make in order to get that caught up with him, and he wasn't nearly as successful in his second term. But he came out of the Long tradition, and he had that type of faction behind him.
Let's look at the political system for a second. I mean, you might be able to understand when you come to the state new, when you turn on the TV set and you see commercials for people running for coroner, for assessor, you see elections all the time. Something's different going on over here. Can you describe again for an outside audience the system of elections for offices that usually aren't elective, endless elections, maybe an overemphasis on politics?
People just seem to love politics in Louisiana. We do elect everybody. We don't elect dog catchers. We elect practically everything else. During the Constitutional Convention in '73, there was a real attempt to change that and to make more offices appointed by the governor, take things more or less out of politics. Even Edwin Edwards was for that. That was part of his program in the Constitutional Convention. Delegates wouldn't buy it. They said that this Constitution will never pass if you try to have a appointed superintendent of education, an appointed commissioner of agriculture, and so forth. And they were not willing to submit it to the people under those conditions, so Edwards had to back down and left the situation the way it is. But I doubt that in other states you really see people running for coroner with ads on television.
Could you just list some of these offices that are, big?
Well, we elect our tax assessor. We elect of course.
Let's hold.
Somebody told us that.
Okay, I'm ready.
We elected an awful lot of officials in Louisiana. If you pick up a ballot in this coming election for a typical parish, you'll find at the top 8 statewide offices from governor on down to insurance commissioner and agriculture commissioner. Then we elect members of the State Board of Education. We elect a number of judges. You elect on the parish level, you're going to elect a sheriff, you're going to elect a parish council or a police jury, depending on the structure in that parish. You're going to elect a coroner, you're going to elect a tax assessor, probably some school board members. And in most elections, we have a list of constitutional amendments on the ballot. So when you get in that voting booth, you got plenty to do.
You go over, start over again and just talk about the ones that are, that are unusual to have elections for.
Okay, we have some of the more unusual ones we have in Louisiana are the police jurors, which is like a county board of supervisors in most states. We have we elect our coroners, we elect our sheriffs, we elect our tax assessors, and then you get on to the school boards and the constables.
Why do you think we elect all these people?
It's the tradition of Louisiana. We want to elect everybody. Every attempt to change it has failed because people always vote any change down. They want it that way.
I mean, why is that, though? I mean, there must be something. I never see that. Doesn't seem to exist anywhere else. With the people.
I think again, you go back to the Huey Long tradition. People think as long as they're voting on it, they have control over it. And if they let someone else do it, it's going to be done appointed on a political basis, and they're not going to have any say in it.
Ever since I moved to this state, when he was in office, when he wasn't in office, every conversation about state politics has revolved around Edwin Edwards. What is it about this guy?
He's just the kind of personality that.
Can you start talking?
Yeah. Edwin Edwards said it best himself a few weeks ago. He said, "I'm just the kind of a candidate that people like to talk about." That he uses that to define the issues and to make himself the issue, and that's the way he wins elections. The people in Louisiana like their politics with a little color, and he gives it to them. He gives them the showmanship, and he's very good at dealing with the press and staying in the headlines. That's his stock in trade.
Is he really larger than life?
I don't know that I would say really when you get to know him, but he certainly is successful in giving that appearance.
What do you think people see? I mean, the voters that have elected him in all these times, what do they see when they see him?
He manages to add a little air of mystery with he lets the stories run about his womanizing. He lets the stories drops hints here and there about things that he's doing for people when maybe he is and maybe he isn't. He's very good at taking credit for everything. He was up in North Louisiana last week taking credit for the interstate. Well, the federal government builds interstates, but he had every local official there eating out of his hand.
Is there something about him? We're trying to get at this point of why you have Huey Longs, you've got Earl Longs, people either transform politics or they become legends. And we're wondering, are we witnessing the same thing no matter what happens in this election? Somebody who just becomes a dominant figure and will be talked about for years to come?
Well, I don't know that any of these 4 people running against Edwards is going to become the next Huey Long or Earl Long. But I think there's something in the psyche of Louisiana that wants a leader. And once they find a new leader they can believe in, he will come up to the statue of Edwards and the Longs.
Is Edwards different than other politicians in the state?
Not really. He just more so. He personifies what.
Could you, for something like that,
I'm sorry. Okay, we'll start over. Edwards is not really different from other Louisiana politicians. He's just sort of the sum total of what the public seems to want in a Louisiana politician. He's a showman, and he also gets results. He doesn't always, in this administration, he hasn't always lived up to his promises, but he always makes things happen. He always gives people a show for their money.
Can you, and you might want to give this a little bit of thought for a second, again, for an outside audience, give us the highs and the lows of his career in politics?
The highs and lows of Edwards' career in politics, I think the highs were mostly in his first 2 terms when he came in and he managed to get through a new constitution, which no other state in the last 20 years has been able to do. He reorganized state government as he promised to do. He managed to lower taxes, at the same time increasing state revenues by bringing in more money from oil and gas. He changed the method of collecting the taxes on oil so that when the oil shortage came and the price went up, Louisiana suddenly became a little Kuwait. Those were the highs. In the first 2 terms, he got pretty much what he wanted. Things were going so well for him then that you didn't really notice the lows. The lows came about when scandals broke that in other states would have ended the guy's political career. When it was revealed that his wife took $10,000 from a Korean businessman that he was doing business with, it just had no effect politically here, because Louisiana is the way it is and people tolerate things like that. Now when times got bad in his 3rd term, then all his faults, you might say, took on a different aura, and that's why his standing in the polls is so low right now. People tolerate almost anything as long as things are going well. When things aren't going well, it becomes a little bit of a different story.
Can you describe real briefly what happened in the 3rd term in terms of his legal troubles?
He was indicted. Edwards' legal troubles in his 2nd term started when he was indicted by a federal grand jury in New Orleans on charges of illegally dealing in hospital certificates of need. The federal government requires you to have these certificates of need not to operate the hospital, but to be eligible for federal money. So if you don't have these things, which are issued by the state, you're in effect not in business. He was accused of favoritism in putting those things out, but the jury didn't buy it. The first trial ended in a hung jury, and the second one ended in an acquittal. That had a bad political effect, however, because it brought out a lot of things about his gambling. It brought out a lot of things about his associations that really have contributed to his unpopularity. And on top of that, it tied him up for a long time. The state was really in a fiscal crisis because of the declining oil prices, and the governor was not here to deal with it. He was locked up in a courtroom in New Orleans. That consequently, he lost control of the legislature. He was never able to regain his balance with them. It pretty much wrecked his 3rd term.
Are there any anecdotes or stories you can tell us that would sort of colorfully illustrates the governor's style, the governor as a politician?
You have to think about that a minute.
Yeah, think about it for a second. Don't,
We have to wait for that chopper to disappear.
Okay.
Even if it's something you directly understand.
Pretend I
it's
asked
quite
this
a trick.
question.
You as a reporter, perhaps, and we certainly as observers, we get a kick out of watching all these hijinks. But what's the downside of all this? I mean, what shape is the state in, and is there sort of cynicism about all this politics being spectator sport?
The downside of the Edwards style of politics is that the question is, does the public really want a governor who's going to spend all his time setting up employee investment funds? He's going to deal in hospital permits at a time when the state's economy is hitting rock bottom. The question is, don't you really need a governor who gives full time to the business of the state? It makes a good show, the way Edwards run things, but in this 3rd term it hadn't been nearly as effective as it was the first 2.
What's your gut feeling about the guy?
I think the guy is probably one of the best, most effective politicians I ever saw in government, and if he had steered clear of all the scandals, he would have made a good presidential candidate. He's got that much ability. But he has a blind spot in his nature. He doesn't understand that these things are wrong. He doesn't understand what they do to his viability as a politician. He gets away with them so easily in Louisiana, he can't understand why a national audience would react differently to him. And that's what brought his career to a dead end.
people become to almost expect it from him.
Yeah, that's it.
We've been watching him, Charlie mentioned last week.
Mhm.
He's almost done anything for education and for people's economic situations.
Edwards has been a good governor for the black community in the sense that he's appointed a lot of blacks to high office. His predecessor, John McKithen, only did that in a kind of a token way. When Edwards came in, he systematically appointed blacks and women to high places. he hasn't enacted a lot of social legislation, but he's protected the welfare system and social services from being cut when we've run out of money. And in that sense, he has been a good governor for the poor. But I can't say that he's inaugurated a lot of new programs or that he's really done anything for the blacks other than appoint some of the leaders to high office.
Do you think he thinks of himself as the poor man's friend?
Yeah, that's been his stock in trade ever since he entered politics. He came into politics at a time when it was not fashionable to take the side of the blacks. And he did do that. And when he became a state legislator, he helped get rid of the State Sovereignty Commission, which was a segregationist outfit. All that part of the Edwards legend is true, and there's no getting around it.
Tape change.
Well, if we asked you things like, could you tell us anecdotes or stories about just things that have gone on in the state capitol, in terms of politics that would be illustrative of the way politics is colorful or different in the state?
Got his nickname. He was not a nickname. It was his real name. It was Speedy because he was premature, so his mother just called him Speedy.
Well, that's we don't have the first part of it. That's okay.
If Speedy makes a comeback, that we may come back in it.
He's just been Edwin Edwards through his whole career. Never heard him called anything different.
Do the people in the political community here feel very close to him? Is he a man with many friends?
He's not a guy that they get close to. It's strange. Dave Treen had the reputation of being, cold and unbending and unapproachable, but really in a small setting, he was a lot more friendly and easy to talk to than Edwin Edwards. No one ever really gets close to Edwin Edwards, particularly nobody in the press.
Why is he running this time?
I think he just had to prove that he couldn't be run out of office. I think it's a matter of pride with him that with all the adversity that he felt like his enemies were trying to run him out, and he just wasn't going to let them do it.
What's your gut feeling about what's going to happen to him in this election?
I think he's going to make the runoff. I think he's going to lead the ticket, and then I think he'll probably lose to whoever's in the runoff with him. But he's not going to go down without a fight.
How will he take defeat?
It's kind of hard to imagine Edwin Edwards as an elder statesman after leaving politics. I can't imagine him just fading away to his Texas ranch and staying out of it. But then again, I can't imagine him running for anything else after losing.
If you had to write an epitaph for him politically, where his place in history is, what would you write?
I think I'd write what I told you a minute ago, that the guy could have been so much better than he is if he just didn't have a blind spot on ethical considerations. If he'd ever learned to shun the appearance of evil, let's say it that way, there'd have been no stopping him.
Is there anything you can think of that maybe not a story or an anecdote or anything, but just an example of how things are different here? I mean, I'll give you an example. When you go to a function, you talk to people, they have this wonderful way of telling you who they support and then what's wrong with the other candidates. And I've never seen it in another state.
I think the way Louisiana is different is just the way that politics is regarded as a spectator sport and a participation sport. And everybody, just like in Boston, I guess everybody's interested in the Red Sox, and here everybody's interested in politics. And it's always been that way, and I guess it always will be, even when Edwin Edwards passes from the scene.
You don't think so? You don't think Louisiana politics is changing and getting more in line with the rest of the South? We spoke to Camille Gravel a couple of years ago, and he was saying that in many ways Louisiana was growing more conservative than we used to be.
It used to be. You're talking about the 50s.
I'm talking about, like in the early long days and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually sort of a more liberal state among other southern states.
The question of whether Louisiana is becoming more conservative, I think the words liberal and conservative don't necessarily have the same meaning in southern politics they do in national politics. Louisiana is a lot more liberal now than it was in the 50s, in the sense that then you didn't have the blacks voting and participating in politics. Louisiana was really cut off from national politics because no one who won office here as a segregationist could hope to succeed on the national scene. I think Louisiana is much more than the national stream of things. I think politicians like Bennett Johnson and John Breaux are much more in tune with the national scene than Louisiana representatives of the past. I don't think you'll ever see Louisiana politics homogenized in the same way it's been in other states. We may be becoming more like other states, but I don't think so.
Stay there for a second and see if anything comes to us before we do all that much.
You asked if the new governor is really going to be able to change Louisiana politics. I think at the state level, the way things are done at the state level, I think there is a lot of room for change. I think a reform governor could come in and make a great deal of difference in reforming the way we collect our taxes, the way we handle our money. But I don't think a governor is going to be able to change Louisiana from the ground up. I think you're always going to have people putting shells on the roads and things like that.
Do you think local politics here is going to change very much? How does local politics operate in Louisiana?
Is it any different anywhere else?
Local politics in Louisiana, the growth has sort of been stunted by the fact that everything in Louisiana is done at the state level. There again, that's part of the Huey Long legacy, because Huey was interested in equalizing the load between the poorer parishes and the wealthier parishes. So he concentrated things at the state level so he could hand out the favors. And Edwards is still handing out those. When you hear us talk about slush funds in this campaign, that's all it means, is that the legislature appropriates money for him to hand out to local officials as political boons. That's one of the things that the new governor can and should be able to change. Local government is going to have to stand on its own 2 feet. What the state's going to have to do to reverse the relationship between state and local government is to give local governments the right to tax their own people to provide services, instead of the present system where they have to come to the governor's office or the legislature and beg for money. That would be a fundamental change in Louisiana politics, and that's one thing I hope the new governor will look at.
Thank you very much.
Okay, enjoyed it.
Thank you. So you can